Hey now, we are getting over, and I am the Silver King, Adam Silverstein, here to lead you through these hard times. Dada, with episode 658 of your favorite professional wrestling podcast. That's right, Getting Over is back once again, and it is Thursday, so you know exactly what that means. We are here to break down everything that happened over the last week across NXT and AEW. NXT, of course, coming out of the Halloween Havoc premium live event from the weekend. I will take this time to remind you that if you did not listen to the Getting Over NXT Halloween Havoc instant analysis podcast, it is waiting for you in our feed. Make sure probably you listen to that before you get into all of today's show. But we're not only talking about NXT coming out of Halloween Havoc as it begins building for NXT Deadline, which is actually still unannounced at this time. But we will be breaking down everything that happened over the last week in AEW as it kind of kicks off its build for AEW Full Gear. And of course, on Wednesday, we had a special edition of Dynamite called Fright Night Dynamite with Halloween looming. On that note, it is October 31st. So happy Halloween to all of our Getting Over heads out there. As we kick off today's show, allow the Silver King to begin with a reminder that the Getting Over Wrestling Podcast
is all about Defy.
A little early on the trigger there, but head over to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave those 5-star ratings on Apple. Take a little extra time. Leave a 5-star written review. If you do, we will read it live right here on the show. Don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube at Getting Overcast. Follow us on Blue Sky. Why not? At Getting Over. And of course, follow us on Twitter at Getting Overcast for episode drops, news, analysis, highlights, all of that good stuff. On Twitter, of course, you can send in questions and comments for the show. We got more questions about NXT than we probably ever have. So we will be going over those on today's program, but you can send in those questions and comments. You can vote in pre and post show polls around special events. If you want to contact us, you can certainly email us gettingoverpod@gmail.com, but you can hit us up on Twitter at Getting Overcast. And please also remember,
I happen to love the number 5.
and I hope you do as well, because for $5 a month or $50 for the entire year, you can become an official Getting Overhead. Just visit buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. Sign up. You will get the fastest 5 minutes in professional wrestling, instant reaction audios to every major TV show, and exclusive news analysis pieces on Fridays. Again, that is buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. Now, it is already somewhat late on Thursday. The Silver King needed to catch up with AEW, was not able to watch live on Wednesday, mostly due to the World Series, which unfortunately did not go my way. I am certainly a New York Yankees fan, and you want to talk about a team shitting the bed. It's exactly what the Yankees did on Wednesday night. So we have a lot to cover on today's show. Not going to waste a lot of time off the top. Want to get right into it. We're going to kick things off with NXT. We'll cover AEW in the second half of the show. As always, there are timestamps in the episode description. So if you want to jump around to one brand or the other, you have the ability to do that. As always, I hope you listen to the entire show. Starting off with NXT, let's do a extremely brief second look at NXT Halloween Havoc. We'll go, I was going to say match by match, but there's really only 2 matches that I have anything extra to say coming out of the show. The first, the NXT Championship, Trick Williams defending against Ethan Page in Devil's Playground. I'm going to keep my grade there, 3.5 stars B. I'm going to reiterate for like the 100th time here that Trick needs a better, more powerful finisher than Trick Shot. That is an utterly ridiculous move for a guy his size. It's a normal move that dozens of people use, including Julia, who doesn't use it as a finisher, yet she delivers the move better than Trick does. There's a reason why in 2024, I want to say no one, but maybe some do, few people still use the super kick as a finisher. It's played out. The pump knee is the new super kick. It's not a finishing move. The reason why, one of the reasons why so many of Trick's matches, they just kind of end and you get the 1, 2, 3 and you're like, oh, okay, that was okay, is because there is not an impactful exclamation point at the end. Think about even, and I know people love the people's elbow, but think about how much shittier of a finisher the People's Elbow was compared to the rock bottom. You hit that rock bottom, you know that match is over. Boom, 1, 2, 3, big reaction. There's an exclamation point on the mat when that happens, right? Another great example, honestly, is Drew McIntyre. The Future Shock DDT was a far better finisher than the Claymore, not only because he's like falling on his back and it's kind of awkward, but the whole 1, 2, 3 Claymore thing that they do. Now, to be fair, Drew executes Claymore way better than Trick does the trick shot. And the ways that he executes it when it's sudden, kind of out of nowhere, because of the nature of the move, makes it hit better than trick shot, just comparing apples to apples. But again, when you have that super impactful finisher, another example I'll give you just because it's coming to the top of my head, Swerve Strickland, right? The JML driver, the house call, the sound that makes, those are way better moves than the Swerve Stomp, where he climbs up, the person below has to sit up, which doesn't make any sense. And then he hits the move and you're just like, oh, okay, I guess the match is over. It's different than hitting an impactful finishing move. So if there's anything to take away from this match and Trick as champion, and look, I know some people from WWE do listen to the show. I don't know how much responsibility they have in making decisions like this, but if someone can get to Trick and Shawn Michaels and tell them to fix this guy's effing finisher. Same goes, by the way, for Carmelo Hayes. We've talked about that before. If you can fix his finisher, man, he is going to hit so much better as an overall performer. I know I went off on a little bit of a rant there. The other topic kind of coming out of the Trick and Page match is the men's main event division in NXT. And I know I got a question about this, which I'm going to skip, unfortunately. Thank you for sending it in because I was going to talk about it here anyway. But this men's division is in a bad way right now. I understand why Carmelo Hayes, Ilya Dragunov, and Braun Breaker got called up. Now, Melo needed to get called up. Ilya too. Breaker, the only reason he had to get called up is because WWE pushed him too hard, too fast upon his debut. He won the NXT title like right away, and they still were somehow able to keep him there for 2 years. He should not have won that title for a year, which means Breaker should be in his third and final year in NXT now, getting called up, this April after WrestleMania 41. But I digress. Calling those three guys up has completely devastated the men's main event scene in NXT. You could even say, look, Baron Corbin, he probably should have been left in NXT to claim the title. Maybe even Apollo Crews. And there is legitimate argument to sending someone like an Austin Theory or a Grayson Waller back down for a spell to have an NXT championship run similar to what Dolph Ziggler and Dominic Mysterio did. Dom, of course, did it with the North American title. Maybe not Waller because he's older and he's, already so good on the mic. But you cannot tell me that Austin Theory would not be better off going back to NXT for 9 months, having a 7-month run as champion of a brand. By the way, a title he never held. He never held a singles title in NXT. He was never North American champion. He was never NXT champion. Sending him back down, letting him get a run at the top, cutting promos as a champion, playing that role and being a guy that can level up the competition because he's so great in the ring, and then sending him back to the main roster. You cannot tell me that NXT wouldn't be better off for that and WWE wouldn't be better off for that. And by the way, Theory would be better off for it. Now, Page, he provided some nice relief. He filled a gap. But now that he's lost to Williams multiple times, they're moving to Ridge Holland and then maybe Wes Lee down the line and eventually Obafemi, who I love, obviously, but is still really not ready to be a main eventer based on his skill level, right? That leaves a lot to be desired from a main event scene. Now, look, if Ricky Starks ends up coming in, yeah, okay, that could play. But maybe Ricky just goes straight to the main roster, and then you're left in the same situation. Dragon Lee is another person. Look, they promised him upon signing him that they were going to move him up pretty quickly. That's what they did. But what's he doing on the main roster? Nothing. Imagine if he stayed in NXT for an additional 6 months and actually got a run with the main title. Think about how over he would have been when he got called up. Instead, he's just sitting in LWO pretty much doing nothing. So there need to be answers found here. And you're not going to bring in free agent talent out of the indies and be able to shove them right into that role. It's when you compare the men's main event division right now in NXT with the women's main event division, it's almost like comparing the men's main event division on Raw with the women's main event division. There's a couple people for the women, but everyone else is, I don't want to say worthless. That's totally unfair. That's the wrong word to use. But everyone else is a tier lower because they either haven't developed, they haven't gotten the opportunity, or perhaps they're just not capable of being main eventers. And this is something NXT needs to figure out. It is a major problem for the brand right now. And let me also note that it's okay for the men's division to ebb while the women's division flows, right? But if that's going to be the case, then you need to start putting the women in the actual main event going forward. There's no reason if, let's say at Deadline, I'm just spitballing here, the matches are Trick Williams and Ridge Holland, or Trick Williams and Wes Lee, or Roxanne Perez and Stephanie Vaquer. There is zero reason for the Trick match to main event that show. It's not as compelling, won't be as good, and the women are what are currently carrying the NXT brand. So that's what I hope we see from NXT going forward, at least in the short term, potentially in the long term as they rebuild the men's division. The other thing I wanted to say about, I realize we're still in the NXT Halloween Havoc second look. I just went off on an unexpected rant there. I wanted to make one adjustment to a match grade. Andre Chase, Ridge Holland Ambulance, downgrading it from 3 stars B- to 2.75 stars C+. It just really wasn't that good. Simple as that. That's all I have looking back at Halloween Havoc. It was a super entertaining show. The Trick match was slightly better than I remembered watching it a second time, but it just didn't move me in a way that made me say that it was a better show than the grade I gave it, which was 86 out of 100, a B, just for all of you who may have forgotten or perhaps didn't yet listen to the instant analysis. And if you didn't, make sure you go back and go listen to that. So let's move to NXT on Tuesday night. The simple one-liner off the top, it was miles better than Raw. It was among the top 25% of all NXT episodes this year, maybe even higher than that. It was a brilliant 2 hours of wrestling television as far as I was concerned. Let's go ahead and break down everything that happened on the show. Trick Williams put himself and Ethan Page over for their Halloween Havoc match. He credited Bubba Ray Dudley, that's the name they're using instead of Bully Ray, as being the only reason Ridge Holland didn't put him in the hospital. Bubba said he did it because Ridge was being disrespectful, and he wondered why no one else went out there to save Trick, telling Williams he needed to develop eyes in the back of his head now that he's the champion again. Trick obviously asked Bubba to team up with him next week at the ECW Arena. Bubba loved how Trick got his juices flowing, and he respected that he asked him. He got super amped up about it even. But he ultimately turned serious, saying he respected NXT and everyone backstage too much to take someone's spot. So he turned it down. That's certainly an unexpected twist to the story. My assumption was that Trick would get into trouble later during the show. Bubba would save him, feeling like he had no choice but to get his back. That would be a big-time babyface move. The only thing that didn't track is Bubba saying, hey, man, no one's got your back, but I don't want to team with you and take someone's spot. Well, if no one has Trick's back, then there's no one's spot that he's taking, theoretically, right? Anyway, they fed off each other well during the segment. I know I was critical of this angle closing Halloween Havoc, and I maintained that stance. It was very TNA. But this was a strong promo segment. Williams was able to play off Bubba well, and they created an intriguing story beat that took us through the rest of the episode. Page came out later in the show, only to be immediately interrupted by Holland, who said everyone was tired of Ethan getting tons of opportunities. Ridge claimed he would be the one to knock Trick off his throne, but as he put Bubba's name in his mouth, Dudley stormed to the ring. He put over Holland's physical attributes and gumption coming back from injury. Bubba got second mentions of his show and co-host jammed into the segment. It's like this guy was doing a podcast ad. Then put himself over as half of the greatest tag team on earth. He said Holland being deserving of a title shot was debatable, while Page currently deserves absolutely nothing. Then Bubba got in Ridge's face, saying he needs to show him more. Holland basically called him washed up and overrated, so Bubba swung. He got beat 2-on-1 until Trick made the save. They cleared the ring, and then Bubba decided to team up with him next week. So I had it backwards, obviously. Ultimately, we got to the same end result. The tag team match is happening. Looking back on it, Bubba playing the whole not taking anyone's spot part, it actually endeared him more to the audience who might otherwise protest him coming in and taking a match. But at the same time, 95% of the viewers knew how this would play out anyway. Again, credit where it's due for Bubba. He commanded the ring on the mic. He did some solid work with guys who needed to step up their game. Paige, not so much, obviously. But Holland was okay shooting back at him. It felt canned, a little bit unnatural. It's one thing to be able to speak lines written for you. It's quite another to deliver them with believability, where it comes off as natural and spot on. That's where Ridge still needs to improve, and maybe Bubba helped him a little bit here. Kalani Jordan confronted Ava, not upset about the stipulation on Halloween Havoc, but rather demanding a one-on-one rematch for the title. Nikita Lyons interrupted, talking shit. She said she'll take any opportunity she can get because Fallon Henley needs a challenger for the Women's North American Championship. So let's put a pin in that. Zarya fought Brynlee Reese. The entrance for Zarya was similar to what we've seen previously. She looked great. The music created an aura around her. Zarya hyper-extended Brynlee's elbow and used it to toss her. She sold it, Brynlee did, as popped out of the joint, so Zarya rammed it back in, which was a pretty cool spot. She avoided a cartwheel move with the German suplex, then speared Reese short range before hitting an F5 to win. I'm not sure if this is purposeful or not, but I realize Zarya hits the F5 on the opposite side of her body compared to, let's say, Brock Lesnar, maybe playing into the joke that stuff is backwards in Australia since it's on the other side of the world, like the toilet flushes in the opposite direction and shit like that. Again, I don't know if it's on purpose or she's doing it to be distinct, but it is interesting. A solid debut match. Zarya looked strong. Brynlee didn't exactly get squashed, which was positive. That's how you make someone look good. You allow them to actually work. There's some Beth Phoenix mixed with Luna Vachon vibes from Zarya here, and I say that in the most positive way. Now, Henley led a fatal influence confrontation of Zarya through the crowd after the bell, only for Roxanne Perez and Cora Jade to emerge from the entrance. The five of them decided to introduce Zarya to NXT. They surrounded the ring, only for Lani to run in and get her back. The heels laughed at that, as did I, because the idea that little Lani was going to be the one to save Zarya from a 5-on-1 attack, it just was ridiculous. But then Julia and Stephanie Vaquer emerged, making it 4-on-5. And Roxy pointed out, hey, we still have the numbers advantage. And then Jordynne Grace came out and surprised all sides. All 10 of them immediately brawled, which was chaotic. Jordan killed Henley with a Death Valley driver. Lani hit X Factor on Jasmine Nix. Zarya murked JC Jane with an F5. And Julia fed Roxanne to Jordan and Zarya, who tossed her into the heels ringside over the ropes. The faces later commiserated backstage, excited for their match, when Rhea Ripley came in, telling them to blow the roof off the ECW Arena next week. More on that in a second. This was an absolute blast. Shawn Michaels straight up flexed here. At first, I thought Zarya was going to be a heel just because of the way she wrestled and how she appeared previously. I guess I just read that wrong, or at least they're putting her on the face side for now. Interesting to bring out 3 top-tier free agents into the brand, all as faces simultaneously, though, again, maybe that's one of the reasons why some of the misalignments we discussed previously were made, people turning heel that we thought should have stayed babyface. Grace was obviously the biggest surprise here. She just lost her TNA Knockouts Championship at Bound for Glory over the weekend. Her contract with TNA runs until January, at which point most expect she will debut full-time in WWE. What we have heard to this juncture is to expect her debut in the Royal Rumble itself and for her to stay on the main roster. Could that change? Are the plans different than what we've heard? Certainly possible, but that's what we've heard at this point. There's really not much need, as far as I'm concerned, for her in NXT. Maybe she'll put some work in there occasionally over the next couple of months before going to the main roster full-time. Maybe give her a couple weeks off, then she debuts there full-time in the Royal Rumble. That's certainly possible. But look, each of the faces got to show out here. I even appreciated the general construction of the segment, with the heels knowing they needed the numbers advantage on Zarya that made her look like a monster. This was turned into a 10-woman tag team match for next week, which is going to be crazy. And it was really cool for Ripley to give them some rub backstage. I'm sure she was there originally to support Zarya in her first match. They're not only both Aussies, they're literally from the same city, Adelaide. But that was not the only time that we saw Ripley. The NXT parking lot struck as Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez were shown walking and laughing with bats in their hands, only for Ripley to be found basically dead on the ground with her driver's side car door open. She was bloodied, all beaten up. Even more unexpected than everything else we saw involving the women Tuesday night was them basically running a Raw angle on NXT, especially because they're no longer on the same network. It's hysterical that these three got just a couple minutes on NXT and the storyline had more development and excitement than we've seen in weeks on the main roster. I always appreciate WWE doing a crossover main roster storyline on NXT. And while this did not make up for Raw being devoid of any star power on Monday, it retroactively made more sense why Ripley wasn't on the show. It was also finally Judgment Day getting the best of her, though I guess it required in this case not only Rodriguez's existence, but also a foreign object. What I wondered after the show immediately is whether getting these three on NXT was like a 1-week deal, or if they might wind up helming War Games teams with some of the women from NXT involved in like the segments that we just talked about, joining their teams. Because the fact of the matter is that would be far better than doing a Raw or SmackDown only match, given the state of those rosters with all the injuries and all the absences right now. However, shortly after NXT went off the air, we heard, and I guess it was released on social media, I think it was also on WWE.com, and they talked about it more on Wednesday as well. But Rhea Ripley actually has a fractured orbital bone, and they shared a CAT scan, not an X-ray, folks, a CAT scan. They showed a CAT scan of that injury. It's basically the top part of her eye broke upwards, and it's kind of just hanging there. So I'm not necessarily sure if that requires it being placed in a proper spot that way it can naturally heal on its own, if it requires a surgery of any kind. But whenever you have an injury to the orbital area, it is very dangerous. And what you need to make sure is that healing at least begins before you start action again. So this could be anywhere from a multi-week to a multi-month injury. I just don't know at this juncture. I hope to have an update for you in Friday's news analysis post. But generally what will happen is you take, 3 to 4 weeks, maybe 4 to 6 weeks. You allow it to start healing. And then in professional wrestling, as long as you're involved in an ongoing storyline, you come back with a mask, and that protects you enough where you can continue going. So I don't know how much this will affect WWE's plans. This is particularly interesting because of what we discussed on the Ultimate Preview, where we assumed Ripley would cost Morgan in her match against Nia Jax, which would lead to Nia winning the Blood Money belt, the Crown Jewel Championship, whatever you want to call it. I can't imagine Ripley flying over to Saudi Arabia now. And, it would have made sense previously, not only for her to cost Liv, but because Raw is being taped live there this coming Monday, or I'm sorry, it's being taped there on Monday, but it's not being pre-taped, I guess is the best way to put it. Certainly not airing live in the United States. But the point is, if she's not going to fly over, then what the hell are they going to do with Liv Morgan, right? That is where this all gets interesting, because what Chris Vanini and I have been talking about on the show on our Tuesday podcast covering WWE is that Raw has done an absolutely terrible job building up the women's division behind Rhea and Liv. There are literally 0 contenders on that brand right now, unless you just took Io Sky out of her tag team with Kairi Sane and just made her a contender. Obviously, at any juncture, she's a legitimate contender for the title. But all of these other women on the brand who could have been built up this entire time, who should have been built up, who should have been working in programs with Liv while she was still dealing simultaneously with Rhea, none of them are set to be put in a position like that. Lyra Valkyria, I think, already had her title shot, or if she didn't have a title shot, she got her moment, certainly, by going to the finals of Queen of the Ring and facing Nia Jax. Let's not forget, Lyra was in a major featured spot the last time WWE had a Blood Money in the Sand show, and now she hasn't been on TV for weeks. That is hugely problematic. It goes to what we're talking about with the Raw roster. So, I don't want to look at this from a silver lining standpoint, because this is basically the 3rd time Ripley's been hurt in 2024 alone. But if you were going to take a silver lining approach on it, this should force WWE's hand to actually build up that Raw women's division, make some legitimate contenders, and spend some time on people other than Rhea Ripley. And that is badly needed. They were able to get away with it last time because they had Becky Lynch. This time they don't have Becky, right? She's probably not coming back until January at the earliest. So the question remains, what's going to happen with the storyline? We don't know what's going to happen with Crown Jewel. We don't know at this time. We certainly will find out Saturday afternoon. And then on Monday, don't miss our WWE Crown Jewel instant analysis at some point early Saturday evening after that show goes off the air. Going back to NXT, Lani fought Nikita Lyons. She was dressed as a pirate, which was unironically her best ever gear in NXT because it's normally awful. They both wound up in splits. Lani hit a great jumping heel kick. Nikita then caught her with a super kick as Adriana Rizzo came out taking off her earrings. That allowed I almost called her Nani, like the girl from Real World. That allowed Lani to avoid a Vader bomb, coming back with one of a kind for the win. Unironically, Nikita's best match in NXT, I guess. That's not really saying much. Rizzo attacked Lyons after the bell. Jordan pulled her off, but Rizzo said Lyons was the one who attacked her. So Jordan not only let her go, but kind of gave her a shove as she did a tope suicida out of the ring, and they brawled to the back. This was really all it needed to be. I was worried when it was booked that Nikita would somehow win, which would have, of course, been nonsensical. Instead, it was Lani getting a win back and some reason to maybe get a title rematch. Obviously, they played out the Rizzo line storyline exactly as we expected. Now, I did get a DM on this subject. Long-time listener, always retweets our stuff on social media. We appreciate it. Big Blaine at Big Blaine71. I generally agree with almost everything you say, he says. But I have to admit, there was one thing I was hoping you were wrong about, but you are not. It is Nikita Lyons. 2 crying emojis there. For obvious reasons, he says he likes it a lot. I think we can assume Blaine is referring to the cake, right? With that.
Gonna look good, but she's got me saying, hey now!
He said, but I am liking her a lot less, and she is getting worse and worse every time she comes back. It looked like she was in an instruction class as she was taking moves. Like the teacher was telling her how to brace for moves, but she was doing it far too much in advance. It's bad, and they keep pushing her. Maybe she's meant to be a manager, and the outfit Tuesday night while wrestling was by far too much. Again, you are right. Well, I disagree with the outfit thing. I actually thought it was decent because she was dressed up, for Halloween. But on the rest, we agree. Look, I wasn't really planning to dig in on her this week, but I'm glad I'm at least not on an island when it comes to Nikita. The push feels so forced, and she does not come across as someone who is anywhere near ready for TV. Kind of similar to Von Wagner, except he at least was capable and safe in the ring, and he had power, which you can always work with, or you can at least try to work with. For a women's division as strong as the one NXT is offering right now, Nikita is clearly a blemish. Anytime she's on TV and someone like Ren Sinclair or Tatum Paxley is not, that's a problem. Now, both of them were on the show. This Tuesday, I'm just using that as an example. Could Nikita work out in a managerial role? Maybe. She's not a great speaker. Neither was Ava. She's done pretty well as general manager. I could see Lyons doing something with WWE, but wrestling, it just ain't for her. Rob Van Dam suddenly showed up next to Ava after the opening segment saying Bubba may not want to be part of NXT at the ECW Arena, but RVD will be there. Ava said she would find something for him to do. Wes Lee gave him a side eye sitting on the couch behind him, then stormed out behind RVD. So I'm thinking we're going to get RVD against Wes Lee. That's going to be great. You had the weed references from MSK back in the day. A lot of people thought RVD was going to be, what did they call it? Was it the Guru? Or I forgot what the name of the person was. But they thought he was going to be the person. It, of course, wasn't him. And it wasn't Jeff Hardy either. It ended up being Matt Riddle. But regardless, Wes and RVD would make a lot of sense, and it would be a really fun bout if it was booked. Another option would be Javon Evans, because he, of course, just lost to Randy Orton, but he could certainly beat RVD, who's not a contracted talent. Those were my thoughts in the moment as the show continued onward. We had the tag team championships set for the show. Fraxium against Javon and Cedric Alexander. There was a hot sequence with Nathan Frazier and Evans, as one would expect. Then it got heated between the champions as they argued over tagging. Javon got an insane energy hot tag with a springboard clothesline on Frazier before Axiom countered another springboard into an ankle lock. Evans threw him into Frazier with a super kick for an accidental DDT. The champions combined for a high-low with a missile dropkick. Evans flipped Axiom into a powerbomb before Alexander hit a Liger bomb for a broken fall. Evans hit a double jump springboard cutter on Axiom for a wild false finish. But as Cedric fed him to Javon, Axiom hit a Canadian destroyer to stay alive. For Axiom combined for their avalanche Spanish fly Phoenix splash combo, but Evans broke the fall with a step-up cutter off Frazier's back on Axiom. Wesley came out with a chair, so Evans took him out with a tope suicida, fought him all the way backstage. Alexander avoided a Phoenix splash, hit lumbar check on Axiom, adding a Michinoku driver on Frazier for another false finish, but Fraxium caught him with a superplex into Golden Ratio Brainbuster to retain the championships. Man, oh man, did I miss my man, Cedric Alexander.
In the dark, I feel at home. Time has passed and now I've grown. Used to dream I'd have it all. Now it's mine, I won't let go. In the dark, I feel at home.
My man absolutely cooked in this match. This was the guy that we saw constantly in the cruiserweight division back in the day. Absolutely loved him teaming with Evans. And while I have a strange feeling they're probably going to feud over Javon leaving him high and dry here, I really wish they stayed together, ran as a tag team, and won the titles off Fraxium sooner than later. All four of these guys cooked. It was easily the match of the night. I decided after this, I was like, I got to see what they do on Dynamite. Maybe something beats it out for match of the week. It didn't as far as I was concerned. So I would say this was TV match of the week across all of professional wrestling in the United States that, airs on TV. I'm not talking pay-per-views or premium live events. 4.25 stars. A perfect TV main event featuring four dudes who can absolutely go. Now, I should mention, the crowd was not thrilled with the outcome because they were so in the bag for Javon and Cedric. I get it. I wasn't fond of them, though, half booing after the bell. I would assume this gets run back with a title change. That's at least my hope. It certainly depends on their plans for Javon and Cedric. They certainly could have them feud. I really hope they don't. I mean, you look at what AEW did with the Acclaimed. You look at what they did, spoiler alert for those of you who don't, want to hear this before we get to the AEW section. What they did Wednesday with Private Party, where they lost matches, came back and won them and still got big pops. I think the crowd would have gone crazy for Javon and Cedric winning here. But man, if they can do that in front of a larger audience somewhere, they got to pull the trigger. They're a great team together. It would strap up Javon, who deserves it for being one of the stars of this brand, despite his immensely young age. Alexander deserves it as well. They're a formidable, believable tag team, and they're believable as a team to take the titles off Fraxium because they took them all the way to the limit here. They got to do it at some point. Fingers crossed that they go in that direction. Now, it turns out I had the right personnel for the segment involving RVD next week. I guess just the wrong alignment. Javon and Wes continued brawling backstage as NXT ended. Security guards eventually got between them. Ava and ultimately RVD came out as well to split them up. Van Dam said now he knew what he was going to do next week, but they did not announce anything. The clear assumption is him being a special guest referee. But I'll tell you, that would be disappointing because I've worked myself into thinking he would wrestle. That's my own fault. The other thing I'll say, though, is ECW back in the day was famous for three-man dances. And if they can go RVD, Javon, and Wes all wrestling each other, that would be fantastic. Either way, it's going to be great to have RVD at the ECW Arena in any capacity. But when I like him in the ring, yes, is it possible WWE is not doing that because AEW has used him as a wrestler already this year and does occasionally? Also possible. We'll see what happens next week. Tatum Paxley fought Wendy Chu in a casket match. This started the show with Tatum cutting a promo as she wheeled out an enormous casket that looked like it had a false bottom, but apparently it did not. Wendy rolled out a bed for some reason. Paxley put a trash can around Chu, beat her with a broomstick. Then she did a running crossbody into the corner and an inverted angle slam, both of which were fresh. Wendy put her in a tree of woe inside a trash can for a missile dropkick, then did a hip toss into a dollhouse. Tatum used a pillow to prevent the casket closure. Wendy dumped out a ton of Legos from it, and she did a double underhook slam into it. Chu took out Paxley with her sleepy elbow drop into the casket. The lid closed on both of them, which did not end the match. Then she got fire extinguished off the apron through her own bed frame, with Tatum dumping Wendy in the casket for the win. This was fun as hell. Silly wrestling at its absolute best. They did an incredible job sticking with the theme. They brought in so many elements of their characters and their feud into this match. It was a necessary win for Tatum. Wendy was probably at her best wrestling-wise since returning from injury. I do wonder whether destroying the bed and Shu getting locked in the casket might allow her gimmick to refresh, whether back to the babyface version or to something entirely different. She probably needs to move away from this version of the character, but this was better than at least 2 of the Halloween Havoc matches, maybe 3. And while I wanted it on that show, to be fair, it was a solid decision to air it on TV just due to the silliness of it and the fact that people probably tuned in specifically to see it. I absolutely loved it, though. They delivered big time for the first ever women's casket match. And again, Tatum got to show her wrestling skill even amid all of the mania. Maybe I'm higher on this than you are. 3.5 stars and a B. The Heritage Cup was on the line. Charlie Dempsey against Lexis King, who had William Regal in his corner. It was fun to have Regal sit on King's throne during the entrance. I thought that was a great touch. Dempsey got the first fall off a butterfly suplex bridge before King kayfabe hurt his knee in round 2. He was braced and helped by trainers, only to force his way back to the ring. Unable to capitalize before the bell, King took punishment in round 3, 2 gut-wrench suplexes and a fisherman's bridge. Dempsey worked the knee. That led Regal to hand King brass knuckles because his back was against the wall. He refused, yelling, "I'm not my father." Dempsey immediately took out his knee and hit a German suplex bridge to retain the cup. Easily King's best match in NXT, largely because Dempsey helped him along the entire way. But if you combine the wrestling with the storytelling for King, then Regal's contributions, it absolutely exceeded expectations. Cool that Regal cost King the match indirectly without helping Dempsey purposefully. We'll be curious to see where this King storyline goes, because to this point, we as viewers have been rightly wary of his babyface turn. Maybe he's going to say, well, I've tried and it failed, so I'm just going to go back heel again. But this is an interesting, unexpected direction for the character. And while he's working well as a heel, or I should say he was working well as a heel, there's something about him as a face that kind of keeps you intrigued. Lola Vice got a promo package promising to knock out Jada Parker, given her legitimate MMA background. She said she would make it so Dawn Marie, the special guest referee, by the way, wouldn't even need to count the 1-2 free. Parker later cut a promo back at Vice, saying her definition of a hardcore match is not just using MMA holds, but destroying her with weapons. She threatened with a kendo stick, telling Dawn Marie not to get in her way because she don't play. Perhaps Lola's best promo to date. Jada delivered as always. This match should be a blast next week. And lastly, Shawn Spears backstage told Brooks Jensen he's planning on becoming #1 contender for the North American title. Just as Spears confronted Tony D'Angelo to make his case, the family interrupted with a phone call he had to take. It was appropriately Nunzio, Little Guido, if you prefer, angry that Tony was going to come to Philly and not reach out to the boys in the city. Getting the family and FBI together would be absolutely incredible. It was here when I realized that if you liked ECW back in the day, there are thousands of us out there who did, you were going to eat next Wednesday night. I imagine there will be other surprises as well that have not yet been teased. But so far for this show, we have Bubba Ray Dudley, we have Rob Van Dam, Dawn Marie, Francine, the Queen of Extreme.
I was up all night.
And possibly at least Little Guido, maybe all of FBI there. That's pretty awesome. And then they're going to fit, of course, some quality matches, the 10-woman tag, the tag team match with Bubba and Trick, Jada and Lola in a hardcore match. Man, I mean, that's going to be a quality show in the ECW arena. Very exciting for next week. Now, I mentioned I did have a lot of people write in about NXT, and I did indeed. Let's go ahead and address some of those questions and comments. First, a big one from Card Cashers at Card Cashers. It says NXT has gone through multiple shifts over its existence with the recent influx of established female stars. Julia, Vaquer, Zarya, possibly Jordan. Why such a massive change in philosophy? A, do you think they saw top talent available and wanted to snatch them up before AEW? B, do you think moving forward, they're going to have a more balanced approach between NIL and top indie talent? C, do you think they're disappointed in the NIL program not creating enough main event women's talent in NXT? Also, on the Halloween Havoc instant analysis, you said you don't think they have a lot of main event talent on the men's side. Do you think they might lean more on free agents to rejuvenate that division? So I'll take the last part first, since I already kind of discussed it. The answer is to bring some people down from the main roster. That's how you help elevate the younger male talent in the division. And yes, they're going to continue adding talent from elsewhere too. We talked about Paige. Obviously, Starks could come in as well. They just have to put effort into it. Calling up the 3 guys I mentioned, it just killed the division. Now, going to the rest of your question here. There's a lot of parts about the women and NIL. My perspective is that this was all about the timing, and it was just a unique situation. Julia, don't forget, was supposed to debut way earlier, but she got injured. Vaquer was WWE jumping on an opportunity. Zarya had been expected in for about a year. I mean, I heard about her a while back and started watching her matches and shit. So that was always forthcoming. But you need to remember, moving halfway across the world is not something you just pick up and do, right? NXT also didn't exactly need her to come in after the recent call-ups. So did they scoop up the top talent available? Yeah, that's certainly how I see it. It's also always been the goal of NXT. To your second question about whether it's going to be a balanced approach going forward, it always has been. NXT 2.0 was focused on some performance center talent, sure. But Carmelo Hayes, Andre Chase, Tony D'Angelo, Eddie Thorpe more recently, Charlie Dempsey, Nathan Frazier, Wesley, Duke Hudson. For the women, Roxanne Perez, Gigi Dolan, JC Jane, Fallon Henley. Those were all independent wrestlers. WWE never went away from indie talent. They just wanted to develop their own athletes as well. It has always been a mixed approach, and it has remained one. Look at them recently, bringing in Javon Evans and Ren Sinclair. It's just that fans completely overreacted to the change as they are wont to do. And yes, you're going to say, Silver King, wait a minute. You overreacted as well. I absolutely did. I thought they were killing NXT. But what I didn't do was exaggerate reality at the time. I said, I don't like that they're getting rid of all this indie talent that should get called up, that should be getting opportunities, and so on. But I also said, they're not going away from indie talent. They're just putting more of a focus on youth, and younger indie talent was part of that. And there's some older indie talent mixed in as well. In terms of potential disappointment in the NIL program, absolutely not. Look at Jada Parker and Sol Ruka and Tiffany Stratton, Braun Breaker, Oba Femi, Trick Williams. I mean, these are all current and future superstars, like guys and girls who are going to, I don't want to say main event WrestleMania, main event pay-per-views at a minimum. And there's a lot of other folks in the pipeline as well. The goal and expectation is not to turn every NIL talent into a main eventer. It's not possible. It's to find a few of them, to find a few mid-carders, some talented and entertaining people. If I need to hire 20 people at $50,000 a year to find one Braun Breaker who's going to make my company tens or maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars over his career, that's a profitable and successful enterprise. That's the purpose of the NIL program in conjunction to what they're now doing with WWE ID, and of course, just the regular scouting of independent wrestling, both in the United States and abroad. Marsh Roma at Salt_King, KYNG. Believe it's a first-time writer, so appreciate you joining the show or writing in for the first time. Said, I was listening to the segment about WWE ID, and you talked about training people in the WWE way. I've heard it mentioned before, like when Jade Cargill signed and then disappeared for a bit. I don't watch much outside of WWE, so I was curious what that means. Do other promotions have their own style of doing things or approach things differently? If so, what do you prefer? Now, I don't remember exactly what I said to that end on Tuesday, but what that generally refers to is wrestling a style that plays more to moments and selling to the crowd, as opposed to firing off spots like Machine Gun style. That coupled with working the camera, also an emphasis on promos and character development, and simply wrestling safer to prolong careers. In the case of WWE ID specifically, there's still a ton that we don't know, but there are certainly some wrestling schools that have historically had more success than others putting talent in WWE. At the end of the day, the training doesn't really matter that much. It's all about the person and their ability. Just like in the NFL, you can have undrafted players from BYU become Hall of Famers. You can also have first-round picks from Florida become Hall of Famers. Does the latter, the first-round pick from Florida, have a greater chance of success because of the pedigree of his school and some of the coaching he got? Absolutely. Can the former, the BYU undrafted player, still get in that spot? Absolutely. It's about talent and ability. And NFL teams will coach people up just like WWE will coach people up. So does it matter where you come from? A little. Does it matter how good you are at the end of the day? Yes, it does. There are poor wrestlers who do great promos that make it in WWE. There are incredible wrestlers who can't promo that much who don't make it in WWE, and they thrive elsewhere, right? To answer your question more about style, yeah, there's tons of different styles. There's Lucha Libre, there's strong style over in Japan. There's more of a high-flying, high-risk style that you see a lot in indies. WWE has historically been a big person's territory. They go with size and muscle and how good you look on TV, in addition to having all those other attributes, how well you can sell a story, how well you can actually wrestle in the ring. It does seem like Triple H, Paul Levesque, is making some adjustments to that. We've certainly seen over the years smaller talent, for lack of a better term, or maybe untraditional WWE talent, get over in a significant way. Obviously, Daniel Bryan is a great example of that. Back in the day, you would have expected for Charlotte Flair to be the biggest star ever. Maybe you wouldn't have expected for Becky Lynch to be the same type of star, but she went out and proved that she is capable of doing that. And she not only, stepped in front of Charlotte, she took the mantle. She's the most important women's wrestler WWE's had in a long ass time, right? Maybe ever. I don't want to say ever necessarily, but long ass time at least. So, there's a lot of different styles. There's a lot of different paths to WWE. There's a lot of different paths to AEW, right? And TNA and New Japan and all these companies. But it's really, at the end of the day, about talent and ability. And that's what WWE is looking for. That's why they do NIL, to develop some of that, see if athletes can become professional wrestlers. And that's why they're doing WWE ID, to take people who they know have a passion for wrestling and see if they can make it based on the requirements of being a WWE superstar, which is frankly different from being a professional wrestler. They still both do the same thing at the end of the day, but the term does have meaning to it because what the company looks for and its level of success and stardom is different from even an AEW or New Japan or anything like that. And lastly, one more question from Macca Baird. And Macca Baird, what would be your early predictions for the deadline card? It's actually a good question from the standpoint of the event not even being announced yet. And again, we talked about the men's division being totally disjointed. I'm starting to wonder whether WWE might actually book it Sunday, December 15th, the day after Saturday night's main event in Long Island, or if they're planning for it like a week earlier. There's a lot of football considerations when it comes to the date, both NFL and college. As far as the card goes, it's really tough to say. Trick Ridge is very much a TV match. Maybe Trick Oba goes on that show. That would be much better for Stand and Deliver in April. Perhaps Trick Wesley is at deadline instead. That would absolutely play. For the women, Perez against Vaquer makes way too much sense. I think it's clear that we're going to get Javon, Julia, Zarya, Paige, Soul, Jada, Lola. They're probably all going to be in the Iron Survivor matches. They're just going to need to fill those out, but that's 4 matches right there. So you add one more, you have a card. So that is NXT this week. Clearly, we had a ton to talk about. This is the most we've discussed NXT on one of these shows in a long time. Let's go ahead and move over to AEW. There was a special intro for Fright Night Dynamite, which definitely hit. Good work by AEW production putting that together, made it feel special. The ring ropes were also orange for thematic purposes. That looked really cool. Unfortunately, the ringside barrier was blue because they were promoting this AEW DC relationship. It would have been nice if they also had that thematic as well, so the visual of the entire show looked like Halloween. It was really odd, basically only doing a half measure. And to that end, I think there were only 3 talents in total who dressed up. There wasn't a lot of like spider webs and smoke and stuff backstage, which would have been cool. They just treated it like kind of a normal show that had a 10% Halloween theme. I wish they went a little bit further. They don't have to go NXT and corny it up and stuff, but they could have gone to, 33% is what I would have said. 4 of 15 matches this week had storyline build and relevance. It's 27%, which is right around normal for AEW, but again, less than half of where it should be, given we are being asked to watch 5 hours of TV. That said, Dynamite itself was a far, far better episode than we've gotten either of the last 2 weeks. Some of that is specifically due to developments on the show, as opposed to the booking of the program in totality. But unlike last week, This was an easy and entertaining watch, and I'm certainly in a far better mood talking about Dynamite coming out of this show than I was previously. Well, except for the Adam Cole shit. But let's go ahead and talk about everything that happened on Dynamite, Collision, and Rampage. Of course, we will do it based on storyline. On Collision, Wheeler Yuta sat down for an interview with Nigel McGuinness. The goal here was to juxtapose Nigel's hatred for Bryan Danielson with the brutality of Wheeler's group. Unfortunately, Yuta was immensely tryhard, completely unconvincing here. Wheeler said they gave Bryan a warrior's death for the greater good, which has not been defined still. By the way, I remembered while watching this that WWE was once creating a faction, the Greater Good, helmed by Seth Rollins, involving Buddy Murphy and the Authors of Pain. It fell apart because of timing, but this was when Rollins was thriving with that Messiah character. Obviously, the connotation is different with this version of BCC, but it's kind of ironic, I guess, that they're using such similar phraseology. I just want them to define this more. I understand they want AEW to reach its potential and they want the wrestlers to not be complacent, but that really isn't enough to sink your teeth into as a reason for literally trying to kill people. Dynamite opened with Claudio Castagnoli helming an angry promo walking out of the arena last week. Orange Cassidy came out, cut it off. He was wearing black again because now he's angry. Orange reiterated that he's not a leader, but he said the young, talented future wrestlers of AEW do not understand the danger of Jon Moxley. Cassidy said Mox doesn't need AEW, but he wouldn't exist without it, he being Orange. Obviously, that engendered AEW chants. Orange said now he knows what he needs to do to save the company. He has to cut the head off the snake and challenge Mox, presumably at Full Gear, so he could take the symbol of AEW out of Mox's bag and put it into his backpack. Did Orange do well on the mic here? Sure, decent enough. It perhaps came across a tad strange because Cassidy doesn't speak to this length with any frequency, but I thought he delivered his perspective well, showed necessary confidence. All of that said, of course, it was basically another stand-up for AEW segment, with viewers being force-fed this concept of AEW being special over and over again. I'm also not sure they thought that closing line through. First, I believe Mox has the title in a briefcase now, not a bag. But second, the idea that Orange would just throw the title into a backpack, that really doesn't bring up the visual juxtaposition that you want. He should have said he would wear it proudly over his shoulder or around his waist. I know he's put prior titles in the backpack, which is supposed to be the gimmick of him being casual with it all. But I've always thought it treats the titles like they're just metal and leather when you do something like that, which is exactly what Mox said about the AEW title last week or 2 weeks ago. So they badly need to rethink that part of it, right? He should be holding the title up and saying, this is something that you guys should strive for. And I'm proud to wear it. And I'm proud to hold it. Not, I'm going to take it out of your bag and put it in my bag. You're hiding it the exact same way. And also, there's going to be a hell of a lot of denim in this match. Just prepare yourself for that. Mox later in the show retorted, saying Orange believes he challenged him for the title, but Mox issued the challenge when he broke Chuck Taylor's neck to cut dead weight out of Orange's life. He said people in AEW are fat and happy with their paychecks, but he wants Cassidy to step up, I guess, and be more than that. He didn't really get to the point. Mox said Orange better be ready to die when they fight. He then decided to test Orange and see who is pulling the strings. So he had BCC hold Wheeler down and put a chair around his torso, with Cassidy saving him just like a dumb babyface would. Yuta was then allowed to stomp on Cassidy as the Dark Order losers again saved and got dismantled in literal seconds. Just as it looked like Orange was going to take a chair around his neck, Darby Allin slid down from the rafters. And I'm going to pause this breakdown here to describe this because it looked like a skeleton in a haunted house, just like hanging there limp or something like that. Also, he came down wearing that furry pink hoodie, which just does not have the same aura of a dude sliding down, holding a bat in a black trench coat. Like, I know they're trying to take the Sting thing and apply it to Darby. Darby looks ridiculous doing it. Sting looked like an absolute badass. I think you could make Darby look like a badass doing it, but they certainly did not in this case. Anyway, Darby was immediately murdered by twice being thrown into the middle of an announce table that like imploded, but he didn't sell it at all. He just got up and kept fighting. Then Top Flight and Private Party and Daniel Garcia all came down to chase them from ringside. So to complete the count here, we ended up getting 11 baby faces coming out to fight off 4 dudes, and they still weren't able to completely take them down. Also, again, no women showed up to go up against Marina Shafir, despite AEW having an entire roster of ladies that don't get utilized. We still have no clearer picture about this group's motivation or intentions. I shouldn't say that. We know their motivation a little bit. We don't really know their intentions. They still don't have a name. And yeah, I would say Orange did look like an idiot, running out to save Wheeler after Mox blatantly told him that it was a test. Orange's opening statement was better than this. And while the title challenge makes plenty of sense for Full Gear, as did Mox's contention that he forced Cassidy into challenging him, I loved that. It was a little bit tough to care about it. And again, the whole idea of Orange being goaded that easily by Mox and giving a shit what happened to Wheeler, who was one of the people who killed Bryan, just did not make any sense whatsoever. On Dynamite, the tag team championships were on the line, the Young Bucks defending against Private Party. This came immediately after that segment because Party was already in the ring. Christopher Daniels gave the challengers a pep talk backstage earlier, and this time Mark Quinn was fully bought into the decision. The stipulation, of course, is that they would split if they lost. Oh, Justin Roberts also dressed like Pee Wee Herman, so credit to him. The Bucks distracted Rick Knox so long, somehow, that Kazuchika Okada was able to tombstone piledrive Quinn on the stage. I guess he didn't give a shit where the 4th member of this tag team match was in. The Bucks failed, but later connected on an EVP trigger for a false finish on Cassidy. Then they hit Kenny Omega's V trigger and One Winged Angel for a broken fall. That was a hot spot at the end. Tagging completely stopped at this juncture. Matt Jackson ate a Poison Rana, and Private Party hit Gin and Juice on Nick to win the tag team titles in 18 minutes. The Bucks stopped their celebration, stole the titles from them, and then handed them back, I guess out of respect. I'll remind you, the Bucks are still heels, and they are still, as we know, attempting a takeover of the company. So that moment just did not fit whatsoever. They should not be happy or respectful at all to these guys. Party celebrated in the crowd. They continued getting a nice ovation, and AEW finally did not cut away from a big moment. I loved the way they let it sit and play out a little bit. High quality match, great title change, spurring a reaction from the fans. Just a lot of fun overall, an important achievement for that team. This appeared to be very much in the same vein, I mentioned this kind of earlier, of AEW not putting the titles on Acclaimed only to rematch and then switch the straps a couple of years ago. There was a similar, albeit quieter, outcry about the Bucks beating Party the first time, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was a change of plans to some degree. In a vacuum, I'm glad the titles changed because it keeps the product fresh. It helps the division rebuild itself, which is badly, badly needed. Looking at it from a wider scope, it does serious damage to this entire elite takeover gimmick, given half the members are no longer champions. You still have Okada and Jack Perry with the titles, but I think we all know Perry's going to drop his sooner than later. And at this point, it seems like Okada's probably going to drop his in the Continental Classic when that happens. Speaking of that, what was the logical reason that Perry wasn't involved here if Okada was? That just didn't really make sense. 4 stars, A-. If you think this was better than Fraxium against Javon and Cedric, that's totally fine. Similar pages. I thought that was a slightly better match than this one. Perry later paced backstage denying an interview with the Elite when Daniel Garcia confronted him about not helping them against Mox's crew. Garcia literally jacked Perry up against the wall twice, completely overpowering him and honestly making him look like a child. That was certainly not the intention, but yeah, Perry came across looking weak as hell. He did get out one good line though. He said, "They used to dance for me too," referring to the crowd, basically saying they would turn on Garcia as well. I did enjoy the interaction in general, showed some balls from Garcia. The way he speaks is almost like a try-hard tough guy though. It's kind of makes you laugh occasionally. The Elite locker room door swung open and it was like a tiny closet. Remember when Elaine tried to get the special fish delivered on Seinfeld from the Chinese restaurant? That was like the closet they were in here. They're EVPs. They're trying to take over of AEW, but they can't get themselves like an ornate or at least a larger dressing room. That was kind of odd. Anyway, Brandon Cutler was randomly shredding documents. The Elite packed their shit quickly. Okada just sat there watching in a chair. The Bucks later ran out of the arena with their suitcases only to get stopped by CD, who yelled at them for leaving when AEW needs them the most. Matt said they wanted to change the world in AEW, but nobody wanted to listen to them. That's not true. Cutler was left alone. He got hit once by Mox. CD tried to stop them from attacking Cutler, but Mox put him in a headlock as Claudio clearly raised a hammer and hit a piece of rubber because the angle was way too close and on the wrong side, and Cutler sold it like he broke his hand. It was just unfortunate that they did it this way. And my thought here was, what the fuck is this? Why would CD have any expectation the Bucks would be there to stand up for AEW? Why would he try to save someone who's completely worthless and against him, like Cutler? He's expecting them to just bury the hatchet and support the company that they were trying to destroy from the inside out because Mox now wants to take it over. Now, my presumption in having the Bucks get out of town is that they will be doing some appearances in Japan over the short term, probably off TV until the build for World's End in December. Don't forget, there is New Japan Wrestle Kingdom and the co-booked show the next night, which is only about 2 months away. So they do need to get on toward building that. It does feel like the ultimate storyline here is going to be Omega and Kota Ibushi beating the Bucks and somehow turning the Elite back babyface to go up against Mox's crew, I guess as a means of trying to save AEW. I have no idea whatsoever how that will play and how that will make sense in kayfabe logic. But Omega over Mox for the title to end his run and end this gimmick would make a lot of sense further down the line if it's not Darby. The question would be, if all this transpires, what happens with Okada? And I certainly don't have the answer for that. On Dynamite, Swerve Strickland fought Shelton Benjamin. There was a 15-second teaser for this match, and really no other mention of it on the show. It main evented, given we knew there was likely something coming at the end. Swerve hit house call before Benjamin box jumped the top rope to stop Swerve Stomp, but Swerve slid underneath for a Liger Bomb. He hit Swerve Stomp for the win. Unfortunate that Strickland is back to the least sensible of his three finishers, with both house call and JML driver are better and more impactful. We actually talked about that earlier in the show, now that I'm remembering. That said, a quality match, solid main event. Benjamin held his own against younger, more athletic talent these days, of course. The way Shelton has been positioned since he debuted has been great. It made Swerve's win more meaningful than it otherwise would have been if he wasn't built up that way. So MVP made a phone call after the match. The lights flashed out for a second. I think it was a production mistake, before Bobby Lashley debuted in a maroon leather suit. The beginning of his theme was similar to the WWE one, just banging on drums. The rest of it was totally different, though. He did his standard pose, and it seemed like pyro was supposed to go off, or maybe it should have gone off, but it didn't, which really reduced the impact of the moment. Lashley hugged MVP tight. He stood face-to-face with Swerve. They got a holy shit chant. Shelton distracted. Bobby leveled Swerve before knocking him out with a full Nelson. Prince Nana, who was similarly killed, he convulsed on the canvas for a full minute. He even sat up randomly, like a fish flopping, to spit in the air and then fall back down, which was absolutely ridiculous. You didn't need to inject comedy into that moment. And then a dozen security guards came out with the Hurt Syndicate fighting them off. MVP then said, "Guess who's back in business," to end it. Didn't seem like a moment that required security. And also, where's the security been during all of the chaos that Mox has been causing of late, right? That's doesn't really fit together. Anyway, great debut for Lashley from the standpoint of showing his dominance. Also enjoyed the way he kind of entered through smoke. It was badass. Didn't like the suit, only because I just wish they kept it thematic with the black and gold. Maybe navy would have been nice, but if it was black or dark navy instead of maroon, the dude would have looked like Morpheus, and that would have been a cool ass look for him. It's clear that Hurt Syndicate needs to be more than these two as wrestlers. Thinking of who is out there, I'd have considered Brian Cage to be a really interesting addition, but with him now alongside Don Callis, maybe that brings Will Hobbs over, because that creates an opening for his character when he returns. He certainly could use the help, a mouthpiece of MVP. That would make a lot of sense. I hope this is a strong, but more importantly, healthy run for Lashley. And hopefully he does not get much creative control. If you heard some of the stuff that he suggested on a podcast recently, you don't want him anywhere near creative. The key here is going to be Lashley beating Swerve head to head, hopefully clean. Cannot let him lose his first match. I presume it's going to wind up being a fourth Syndicate member interfering and costing Swerve. That would probably work out well enough if they do it that way. In terms of the name, Hurt Syndicate, look, it just doesn't work as well thematically as Hurt Business. It's a better name in pretty much every single way. It's also fair to question AEW just rehashing another WWE storyline. Maybe it's a different name. Maybe it's a different color combination. If they had done one of those things, it would have allowed it to stand out a little bit more. The idea being put a fresh coat of paint on it, just give it a different look and different sounding concept. Instead, it's pretty much just the exact same thing. I'm not against it. I love those guys, all of them. I completely agree with Hurt Business being underutilized in WWE towards the end, or ending too early. Lashley being underutilized towards the end of his career, obviously. Injuries did play a role in that. We've discussed it previously. This is a wait and see thing as far as I'm concerned. But the fact of the matter is Lashley is something that AEW has simply never had. The big hoss main eventer who you could put the title on tomorrow and it would make all the sense in the world. On Collision, Jay White beat Shane Taylor in 9 minutes. There was no reason for the match happening. White had an incredible sell on a pump knee where he bent backwards on his knees, but he won seconds later with a Blade Runner, so I guess it wasn't that impactful. White cut a promo on Hangman Page after the bell, basically putting over his head-to-head record of victories and making the expected challenge for Full Gear. The crowd is really into Jay as a babyface. That's a huge positive. The promo, frankly, sucked. Hangman showed up on Dynamite being told the match was already official, so he didn't even get a chance to answer the challenge that was made just a couple days earlier. Page conceded that his losing streak to, White bothered him. He said this is not a shot at redemption for him, but rather a chance to deliver consequences. Hangman basically guaranteed a win. He promised to leave White hurt and behind with less than he had before the bell rang. Extremely strong promo from Hangman. Some Jake Roberts vibes here, right? At least a little bit. But their match, it's been solid build-wise, despite some of the inconsistencies I've mentioned. On Rampage, Ricochet beat Nick Wayne in 13 minutes, obviously the best match of the show, despite not having any build. Wayne hit a real tight snap German suplex bridge. Ricochet emulated that with a regular one. Wayne caught him off a springboard with a cutter, Canadian Destroyer as well. Ricochet actually sold it perfectly. He followed with his driver finisher and then debuted a new one, a basement lariat, which frankly was awful. Konosuke Takeshita stood on stage after the bell. He did absolutely nothing. I'm okay with Ricochet not doing a high-risk move in matches that really don't matter because he's getting older, but he should at least be doing something athletic. The lariat was way worse than the driver, which itself wasn't good. 3.5 stars and a B. There's a separate point I need to make because of something that was on full display during this match. High flyers all have their own unique movements and such, but something that has permeated this style is this idea that before hitting a running or a springboard move, the performer needs to stop in their tracks, extend both of their arms, and point in the direction they're going. Like they need to rev up to go do the move. I shit you not, it happened at least 4 times in this one match. What makes high-flying wrestling exciting is the idea that these guys are just going to go out and do wild shit as part of fluid offense that helps them win matches. When you add those unnecessary theatrics, and these two are not the only people who do it. Will Ospreay does it. Kenny Omega does it. Kyle Fletcher does it. And I can come up with probably people in WWE maybe who do it as well, though at the moment, no one is coming to mind. It makes it look like they're doing gymnastics. It's an easy fix. It's something that should heavily be considered. Now, Omega doesn't do it that much. Ospreay, some matches he does, some matches he doesn't. Fletcher does it all the time. Ricochet, I never remember doing it a lot in WWE. Maybe he did, and it was so rare that any other performer would do it that I didn't notice. But Nick Wayne, I think he did it 3 times in this one match. And it's ridiculous. You got to work that out of your arsenal. On Collision, Ricochet beat Lio Rush in 11 minutes. Before the match, Ricochet said he doesn't want anything to do with MVP. Then Rush came in accusing him of doing something with MVP, which literally made 0 sense. Again, the best match of the show. Ricochet caught Rush for a great Blue Thunder Bomb. That was for Takeshita. Leo introduced a chair for no reason whatsoever. So Ricochet hit a basement dropkick into it, adding a tope and that basement lariat that I don't like for the win. Another 3.5 stars B. On Collision, Kyle Fletcher cut a promo saying he was keeping an eye on Ricochet before calling out Will Ospreay for a face-to-face on Dynamite. He also said he wanted to fight an up-and-comer in a match at some point. I mean, talk about lacking build for something. I want to fight someone at some time. I mean, come on. Fletcher looked way better and more serious with the shaved head. I will give him that. On Dynamite, Fletcher called out Ospreay, who of course didn't show up. Instead, his tag partner, Mark Davis, who he had been out forever with injury, angrily confronted him. Fletcher assured him that Don Callis kept the spot open in the family, and Davis, instead of accepting that, dropped the mic and walked out on them. Fletcher stopped him, saying Davis will have a hard decision to make at some point, and Davis just saw what he did to Ospreay. Sensible storytelling to continue building Fletcher's character. I presume they're going to run this at Full Gear, with Davis helping Fletcher get the win, aligning with his teammates, and working against Ospreay. On Dynamite, Chris Statlander fought Camille. Mercedes Moné backstage cut a pretty solid promo, at least for her. She also looked great for Halloween, but I couldn't really tell what exactly she was trying to be.
Gonna look good, but she's got me saying, hey now!
This was back in the standard women's match spot.
Oh, we got two big meaty men bumping me tonight.
Camille did a guillotine leg and torture rack powerbomb. Stat almost immediately came back with Wednesday Night Fever to win in 6 minutes. Way too short for a Haas match. Way too short. The booking of Camille has been, frankly, horrific since she debuted. Completely unimpressive, even if she had a couple individual moments in this match that stood out. Monet leveled Stat with the title after the bell, yelled at Camille to exit, and said she would handle this herself, but all she did was grab Stat by the hair and put the title in her face, and then the segment ended. I'm not going to say this was bad. It certainly left a lot to be desired. We knew Monet Stat was the direction for Full Gear. That match ultimately should deliver. I don't really see any situation, though, in which Mercedes drops the title. On Collision, referring to last week, Kyle O'Reilly said he's good with the conglomeration and not looking backwards towards Undisputed Kingdom, despite keeping an eye on his former friends. On Collision, Adam Cole said the old version of himself is dead. Buddy Matthews said he didn't call him out due to disrespect. And then in the same breath, he changed that, saying he respected the old Adam, but not the new Adam. So he disrespects him. They really just said a bunch of words here. In what way is this a different version of Cole, by the way? He's done absolutely nothing since returning. So how is he different? It was also one of those old, stupid back and forth tape promos where they somehow knew what the other person was saying, which just didn't make any sense. On Dynamite, Cole fought Matthews. O'Reilly watched backstage. Buddy stomped Adam's ankle on the steel steps for an injury cell and a match delay. The crowd counted to 10 and chanted for Buddy. The referee waved them off, which was hysterical. It popped me. Cole was on his way backstage with the trainer when Matthews grabbed the mic, called him fragile and a little bitch. So Cole went back to the ring. Cole hit a couple pump knees before his leg gave out trying the finisher. So Matthews hit a stomp. That was a false finish. Buddy then gave Adam a towel to throw in, but Cole threw it in his face instead. He had a shining wizard. Despite the injured ankle, Cole tried Panama Sunrise. He got caught with a knee. He kicked out of a stomp at 1, which was, of course, ridiculous. Then we got a cut of a taped MJF watching this, which was just, again, ridiculous. Cole then hit Panama Sunrise, didn't sell the ankle at all, even though you're jumping off the rope and landing on both of your feet. And then he immediately did it a second time outside the ring and still didn't sell the ankle, even though he landed on a tougher surface. He came back inside, hit the boom, and won. This was immensely overbooked. Terrible in-ring logic. Absolutely hated the way it was wrestled. Buddy carried Adam from bell to bell, and Cole was gassed here. Cole said after the bell that he knew what Matthews did. He went out of his way to remind him who the real Adam Cole is. Then they shook hands, the lights went out, they came back on, and Malachi Black was in the ring holding Cole's hand instead of Buddy. And then Cole limped out of the ring to the point that he needed assistance to the back, which again flies in the face of what happened over the final 5 minutes of the match when he was perfectly fine. The Black moment got a holy shit chant, but for me sitting at home, it got a holy shit reaction. In that, it now seems like Cole is literally going to plow through the House of Black, an incredibly talented and previously dominant group that should be prominently featured in this company, by the way, just to get his match with MJF, or at least to get to the third match, maybe against Roderick Strong, that he loses. Fuck, is that frustrating. Even the attempted logic Cole provided, I see what you did, you were trying to help me, did not make sense. Why would Matthews give a shit? Why would House of Black have any investment in helping a guy they've never interacted with or feuded with, either in AEW or WWE, if my memory serves? Matthews starred here as usual. He remains the best kept secret. It sucks that he's in this type of role and continuing to be underutilized. The kick out at 1 was ridiculous. I'm glad the crowd saw through all of this and actually cheered Buddy above Adam. Separate from all of that, because people are talking about this, yes, Cole did look terrible physically, both his skin appearing yellow and just his overall body shape. I'm not shaming him. We saw what happened with Sheamus when he returned early, then he got cut after just a couple of months. But debuting Cole like this and putting him next to a guy, frankly, who is a specimen in Buddy was definitely not a great decision. Later backstage, Undisputed Kingdom was with Cole as he got checked out by a trainer. He cut a promo on MJF saying he didn't blame him for a shattered ankle. Why would he? Cole did it to himself. He also didn't blame him for not checking on him during his recovery. Why would he? Cole turned heel on him, but he was mad at MJF for pretending they could be friends. MJF didn't pretend. He was his friend. Cole turned on him. Cole used Wardlow, Sammy Guevara, and Daniel Garcia As examples of MJF turning on his friends, Wardlow was never his friend. It was very clear in the angle he was not his friend. Neither were Sammy or Danny. I mean, I guess they worked together briefly, but they weren't really. Cole said he cares about AEW and its locker room and its fans, and MJF does not. MJF was already a star in AEW before Cole even signed up with the company. Talk about treating your fans like idiots and trying to rewrite history. On top of that, it was another, stand up for AEW promo. I'm so sick of this shit. On Rampage, Kingdom beat Gates of Agony and Shane Taylor Promotions in 9 minutes. Surprised that the only team regularly on TV won a triple threat match. There was not much build to this, but they did promote it for a week, so I guess fair enough. Unfortunately, it used the dumb babyface triple threat rules with only 2 legal men at once. Doesn't make any sense. There was another backstage segment with the Beast Mortos. Kingdom reminded him that he's better with them. That relationship is unironically one of my favorite things in AEW right now, mostly because I have no idea where it's going, unless it's just a short trios through with LFI, and that would certainly be disappointing. On Rampage, Mortos beat Beef in 10 minutes. JD Drake, who apparently still exists, got choked out with an electric yellow cord as LFI beat on Beef after the bell. Pretty extreme for a couple jobbers, especially given another faction is doing the exact same shit. Mortos didn't hesitate during any of this, which makes the Kingdom part kind of strange. On Collision, Kingdom again met with Mortos, but tried to bribe him with sweets instead of meats. Mike Bennett then showed up wearing a Mortos mask for Halloween, and Strong wanted them to go trick-or-treating together. Again, it's a lot of fun, but it actually needs to move in some kind of direction. Okay, we've done enough of the same segment. On Collision, the Outrunners beat MXM Collection in 11 minutes. Before the match, FTR rooted for them to find a road to the AEW tag team titles. Then an Outrunner completely missed his cue to talk. I enjoy the Outrunners on their own. This whole co-signing from FTR is such an eye roll for me. It was cool to give them rub initially, don't get me wrong. It's ridiculous now. Plus, why is FTR rooting for another team to win the tag team titles when, they think they're the best tag team in the world and should be champions, right? Johnny TV watched this backstage. Maybe he's going to get his 4th gimmick already in AEW. On Collision, FTR beat LFI in 17 minutes. This was the main event with no specific build. Jake Roberts helmed a promo before the match that was concentrating on possibly breaking someone's arm. It was really strange. FTR hit Shatter Machine on Drillisico for the win. LFI tried to attack after the bell. The Outrunners saved. Immediately after the bell of a perfectly fine B match. A B, maybe even under a B. Tony Schiavone told us that this, it, was where the best wrestle.
Are you fucking kidding me?
Wrong winners, as far as I'm concerned. You just put LFI together, you gave them Roberts, and you immediately have them lose to FTR, despite having a 3-on-2 advantage ringside, by the way. They could have cheated to win. The Outrunners could have made the save. The segment could have ended the exact same way. On Dynamite, Chris Jericho on the Learning Tree bragged about his ROH title win and talked about the star rating of his match with Mark Briscoe. Lordy. Jericho talked about leading AEW to greatness and now doing the same thing for Ring of Honor. He was already champion. This is the second time. This got 0 reaction. Briscoe later cut his typical passionate promo and challenged them to another trios match. This did not need to be on the show at all. Given Dynamite was relatively loaded, give this time to the women's match. What about doing that? This really should be something that exists on Collision as something different. It's ROH related. Keep it off Dynamite. On Dynamite, Christian Cage led the patriarchy in a promo telling Hook they had a misunderstanding last week, but he'd like to explain himself in the ring next week. That was it, 10 seconds. On Rampage, Anna Jay beat Layla Gray in 3 minutes, the only women's match of the show. Of course, 3 minutes, no build. At least they were both contracted talents. Deonna Purrazzo and Taya Valkyrie whispered about it while watching backstage. We have no idea what they said. On Collision, Anna beat Viva Van in 10 minutes with Widow's Peak, the Gory Bomb. This was solid. It did nothing to make one believe that Jay is suddenly a legitimate title contender. And again, no reason for it happening. This is so typical of AEW, where they decide to put someone in a title match and they just constantly put them on TV to make you think they deserve it, which is not the case. Mariah May in a tape promo said Anna is easily replaceable by another blonde with a fat ass. Not untrue. On Rampage, Harley Cameron cut another comedy promo on Thunder Rosa. She did the same on Collision, but with a cat face paint. So Thunder came in, challenged her to a match. Harley is doing really well in this role. She's a lot of fun on the screen. Her comedy mixed with Thunder's seriousness, it's a good time. I'm just hoping this doesn't jump the shark and become a parody of itself, which is something that happens frequently in AEW. And lastly, on Collision, Penelope Ford beat Robin Renegade in 5 minutes. No build, 2 women's matches on the show at least, but it's basically performative when there's no reason for them happening. She randomly yelled, "I'm a bad girl," before hitting a gutbuster and Mutilock to win. It reminded me of like Lola Vice in NXT. She goes, "I am Latina." And then she does a hip attack. It's so weird to just randomly shout out like a basic phrase. Jamie Hayter then challenged her to a Dynamite match next week. They got heated this week on Dynamite with Hayter promising to mop the floor with Ford. She better. Hayter was also dressed as Daphne from Scooby-Doo. So she was one of really only 2 people, maybe 3, who actually played it up for Halloween. Missed opportunity for the rest, but shout out to Hayter for doing that. So that wraps up AEW this week. Again, enjoy Dynamite. There were some issues that I outlined primarily with the Adam Cole storyline and, the lack of logic in certain cases when it comes to what they're doing with Jon Moxley's crew and all that type of stuff. But a far more entertaining and exciting episode than anything we've gotten from Dynamite recently. Collision and Rampage again, just a waste of time. In terms of ratings, we actually ended up taping the show pretty late. NXT is out. AEW was not. NXT was below 600,000. They went against the World Series, a major speech from a presidential candidate. Actually, there were 2 things going on simultaneously for the election. So no surprise that it got knocked down a bit due to competition. Dynamite also against the World Series. But it's almost, it's super late while we're taping the show and the ratings are not out. So maybe they won't be out until tomorrow or later this week. We'll talk about the number, if it matters, next week here on the show. But on the way out, let me first remind you, we have our WWE Crown Jewel Ultimate Preview and our NXT Halloween Havoc instant analysis waiting for you if for some reason you have not listened to either or both of them. And of course, we will be back Saturday with our WWE Crown Jewel instant analysis. Let me remind you that the Getting Over Wrestling podcast
It's all about the five.
So head over to Apple Podcasts and Spotify, leave a 5-star rating on Apple. Take a little extra time, leave a 5-star written review. If you do, we'll read it right here on the show. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube at Getting Overcast. Follow us on Twitter at Getting Overcast for episode drops, news analysis highlights, all of that good stuff. And please also remember,
I happen to love the number 5.
and I hope you do as well, because for $5 a month or $50 for the entire year, you can become an official Getting Overhead. Just visit buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. Sign up. You will get the fastest 5 minutes in professional wrestling, instant reaction audio to every major show, and exclusive news analysis posts every Friday. Again, buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. Thank you all so much for listening to this edition of the Getting Over Wrestling Podcast. We will be back on Saturday with our 3rd show of the week. But at this point, it is time for the Silver King to sign off and leave you with just 3 final words. Bye for now.